Continuing from last chapter, Little Mink obtains a true physical form, revealing the true body of the heavenly demon Mink. The golden hall was magnificent, resplendent with gold, exuding grandeur and majesty. At this moment, several figures stood within the hall, the atmosphere oppressive and severe. At the front of the hall, two figures sat upon thrones, from whom faint, astonishing waves of energy slowly emanated. On the left throne sat a man dressed in fiery red robes. Even his hair was a vivid flame-like red, as though he were a living blaze. In his hand, two crimson orbs slowly rotated. His face was marked by indifference, and his posture was notably lazy, making him seem completely out of place in the stern atmosphere of the hall. Yet no one dared to rebuke him. To his right sat a tall, powerfully built man in gray robes, expressionless and unmoving, his body as solid as a mountain, exuding an unshakable weight and presence. Tianjun, we've been waiting here for nearly 2 months. The 100 Dynasty War is about to begin, and we don't have much time to waste here, the large man in gray said, his gaze cold as he looked at the figure standing in the center of the hall. His voice rumbled, causing the hall to tremble slightly. Looking toward the hall's center, one could see a familiar figure standing there, Tianjun, who had previously had a grudge with Lin Dong. However, the former overlord of the Northwest region now stood humbly before the two figures. Brother Mu Huang, that Lin Dong must have gotten word of your arrival and deliberately gone into hiding. If we withdraw now, we'll be playing right into his hands. These 2 months of waiting would have been in vain, Tianjin said with a fawning smile. I know both you, Brother Mu Huang, and Brother Zhu Tianhua are preparing for the 100 Dynasty War. But if we can eliminate Lin Dong, the 2 legacies he obtained from the 4 Grand Profound sects will fall into your hands. With that power boost, you'll be even more formidable in the upcoming war. Tianjun continued, carefully choosing his words to appeal to the 2 powerful figures. His flattery seemed to work. Even the nonchalant man in red, who had been idly playing with his crimson orbs, paused and looked at Tianjun with a sly grin. Your tongue is as sharp as ever. You're right, though. Since we've already waited 2 months, a few more days won't hurt. Stretching lazily, the red-robed man smirked and added, besides, I'm curious to meet the man who managed to defeat the 3 overlords of the Northwest. I've been hearing quite a bit about new challengers emerging recently, though, unfortunately, few have truly impressed me. This was Zhu Tianhua, hailing from a super dynasty with profound heritage. Though some had recently skyrocketed to power in the ancient battleground after stumbling upon hidden treasures, Zhu Tianhua viewed such fortune-seekers as little more than upstarts. Many so-called rising stars had already met their end at his hands during this time. Brother Tianhua, I agree. Lin Dong is a tough opponent. If not for reliable intel, I'd never believe he came from such a low-tier dynasty as the Great Yin Dynasty, Tianjun remarked seriously. Oh? That makes me even more eager to meet him, Zhu Tianhua replied, his grin turning colder. His smile sent a shiver down Tianjun's spine, knowing full well that beneath Zhu Tianhua's laid-back demeanor lay a strange and erratic personality. Zhu Tianhua despised those who suddenly ascended to power through treasures or legacies. Many of these so-called black horses had already fallen by his hand. The giant figure of Mu Huang, who had been sitting motionless on the throne, suddenly leaned forward slightly, his gaze turning toward the sky outside the hall. A rare smile appeared on his usually impassive face. It seems the prey has emerged. At the same moment, Zhu Tianhua also paused, his playful grin widening. He stood up and strode out of the hall, powerful waves of primordial energy surging from his body like a flood. Behind him, the hulking figure of Mu Huang rose and followed at a leisurely pace. So, he's finally showing himself. Watching their retreating figures, Tianjun's eyes gleamed with a savage joy. He was eager to see if Lin Dong could still be as arrogant as before, now faced with this situation. The thought of Lin Dong's imminent downfall filled Tianjun with satisfaction. He quickly followed behind the 2, knowing that after today, Lin Dong's streak of miracles might finally come to an end. The entire ancient hall was thrown into chaos as a swirling spatial vortex suddenly appeared in the sky, drawing countless gazes filled with various emotions. These looks were brimming with curiosity, greed, and schadenfreude, because they knew exactly who was emerging from that vortex. They also knew what fate awaited that person. Many people had been waiting in this ancient hall for one reason, for this very moment to arrive. Under countless watchful eyes, the spinning spatial vortex slowly solidified, and then two figures gradually emerged, fully revealing themselves to everyone's sight. At that instant, the entire city seemed to fall into a momentary silence. The strange atmosphere within the city also caused the two who had just stepped out of the vortex to pause momentarily. Lin Dong, at the front, frowned slightly, while behind him, Little Mink's strikingly handsome face curved into a mocking smile. No matter where you go, trouble seems to follow. Lin Dong ignored Little Mink's teasing. He looked down at the city below, where a sea of faces stared back, his gaze darkening slightly. His voice, however, remained calm and even. It seems we've been targeted again. You and Little Yin each obtained 2 of the 4 grand profound sex legacies. It's no surprise people are envious. Besides, unlike Lu Bai and the others, you don't have any strong backers. Only a fool wouldn't try to squeeze such an easy target, Little Mink said with a carefree grin. I just wonder who's going to try squeezing me this time, Lin Dong replied with a smile. Although he asked this, his gaze had already shifted toward the Golden Hall, the most prominent building in the city, where he sensed 2 incredibly powerful auras. Those auras were much stronger than those of ordinary threefold Nirvana experts. 2 guys who are almost ready to attempt their 4th Nirvana tribulation. Not bad. I'd guess they're from the Nirvana ranking, Little Mink said with a laugh, though his face lacked any seriousness. As his physical form recovered, the natural arrogance of the heavenly demon mink tribe flowed once again through his veins. Even though Lin Dong forbade him from easily using the power of his tribe, dealing with such figures wouldn't be much of a challenge. They're quite the big shots then, Lin Dong nodded. Such figures were indeed qualified to be on the Nirvana ranking. If he had encountered them before entering the ancient treasure, he might have avoided them. But now, Lin Dong and Little Mink hovered in midair, exchanging casual remarks, with no intention of leaving. This caused many in the city below to raise their eyebrows, but they soon sneered. If those 2 knew who they were about to face, their expressions would likely be far less relaxed. Haha, the enemy is near, yet you 2 are still laughing and chatting. Your composure is quite surprising. Just as the entire city's attention was focused on the 2 figures in the sky, a lazy voice echoed through the air. Then, everyone saw 2 figures stepping out of the Golden Hall, walking through the air toward Lin Dong and Little Mink. The moment those 2 appeared, a wave of commotion swept through the city. Clearly, their reputations were well known and feared by many. Lin Dong's gaze landed on the approaching figures. The man in front wore fiery red robes, his flaming red hair especially eye-catching, with a playful smile hanging on his face. Behind him was a tall, expressionless man whose aura was immensely oppressive. Zhu Tianhua tilted his head slightly as he looked at Lin Dong, then smiled and said, From the great Qin dynasty, I am Zhu Tianhua, the fire general, and I am Wu Huang, the mountain general. The tall man's voice rumbled like thunder. Lin Dong of the great Yin dynasty, Lin Dong responded, spreading his hands nonchalantly, completely unfazed by their oppressive presence and attitude. We've been waiting for you for quite some time, Zhu Tianhua said with a warm smile, his eyes locked onto Lin Dong. We've taken a liking to the 4 grand profound sex legacies. Why don't you hand them over? Lin Dong glanced at Little Mink, who grinned and said, Looks like someone's even cockier than me. Shaking his head in exasperation, Lin Dong turned back to Zhu Tianhua, and in the same serious tone said, How about you turn around and leave now, and I won't mind your attitude. What do you think? Zhu Tianhua scratched his nose, his smile bright, but in an instant, his eyes darkened. Say that again? My big brother said, Get lost now. Suddenly, the space behind Lin Dong cracked open again, forming another spatial vortex. From it, a massive wave of bloodthirsty energy surged out, instantly dyeing the world blood red. From within the vortex, a deep voice echoed out, as if it had come from the depths of the Shura realm, filled with murderous intent. causing countless people to change their expressions in shock. A terrifying wave of killing intent surged out from the spatial vortex, and in an instant, the temperature of the entire world seemed to plummet to a chilling cold. Inside the ancient hall, many gazes turned toward the spatial vortex once more, all shocked by the sudden, horrifying aura that had appeared. Even Zhu Tianhua and Mu Huang narrowed their eyes slightly at this moment, their previously playful expressions fading a bit. Whoever possessed such an overwhelming presence clearly wasn't one of those treasure-reliant upstarts they had encountered before. Under countless watchful eyes, a large and imposing figure slowly emerged from the spatial vortex. With a single step, the figure fully revealed itself, bringing with it a surge of killing intent that filled the air. This figure was as tall and robust as a giant, with a bare upper body covered in crisscrossing scars, as if centipedes were crawling across his skin. On his shoulder, he carried a massive black iron rod, and from afar, he looked like an ancient Asura who had come to move mountains, exuding a terrifying aura. Though Mu Huang, the mountain general, was already quite large and imposing, he instantly seemed small and insignificant compared to this giant. Little Yin? Seeing the enormous figure step out, Lin Dong was stunned for a moment before a look of joyful surprise appeared in his eyes. This figure was, of course, Little Yin, who had just emerged from his secluded cultivation within the White Tiger Hall. After 4 months of grueling training, Little Yan's aura had become incredibly frightening, filled with such intense killing intent that even Lin Dong was taken aback. He could only imagine the kind of brutal training Little Yin had undergone during this time. Big brother. Little Yan's beast-like crimson eyes softened as they landed on Lin Dong, the redness receding like a tide. The fierce expression on his face broke into a silly grin, instantly dispelling the murderous aura he had built up earlier. Those with sharp eyes were astonished at this sight, glancing back and forth between Lin Dong and Little Yin. Clearly, they hadn't expected this terrifying figure, who resembled a wild beast from ancient times, to show such a simple and innocent expression in front of Lin Dong. Little Mink, standing nearby with his arms crossed, watched Little Yin with interest and said with a smile, "Tisk, seems this guy's made quite the progress during this time. Second brother, you finally have a physical body?" Little Yan's gaze turned toward Little Mink, his grin widening. Even though this was his first time seeing Little Mink's human form, he instinctively recognized the familiar aura emanating from him. Little Mink lazily nodded, but then suddenly seemed to remember something, his expression darkening as he angrily retorted, "Second brother, my foot. I'm the eldest. I've lived longer than the two of you combined." Little Yin scratched his head and, gripping the black iron rod on his shoulder, said earnestly, "Big brother says you're second brother, so you're second brother." Upon hearing this, Little Mink's handsome face turned as red as a liver, clearly on the verge of exploding with rage. "Isn't this little family drama a bit too ridiculous?" The voice came from Zhu Tianhua, who was no longer smiling. His eyes turned cold as he stared at Little Yin and said slowly, "You're the first person to ever tell me, a general of the great Qin dynasty, to get lost. Then let's fight." The trace of naivety on Little Yan's face vanished in an instant. Without another word, his iron rod sliced through the air with a sharp whistle, directly pointing at Zhu Tianhua and Mu Huang. Once again, a wave of killing intent surged from his body. Seeing this, Zhu Tianhua and Mu Huang's expressions darkened. Clearly, this was the first time they had encountered someone so brazen in front of them. I've seen plenty of people who think they're hot stuff after obtaining some inheritance, but people as clueless as you are a first. Zhu Tianhua took a deep breath, and a smile returned to his face, though this time it was laced with murderous intent. It was clear that the arrogant attitude of Lin Dong and his companions had begun to anger this high-ranking general of the Great Qin dynasty. "We are from the Great Qin dynasty." Mu Huang, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke in a deep, oppressive voice. Those 4 words carried a weight that, in this ancient battleground, few could afford to challenge. "I know. But if you think those 4 words alone are enough to make us hand over the inheritance we worked so hard for, you're sorely mistaken," Lin Dong responded with a casual smile. He understood the pressure that came with those words. But he also knew that backing down wasn't an option. They had sacrificed too much for this inheritance, and no matter how powerful the Great Qin dynasty was, if they pushed Lin Dong too far, even a super dynasty wouldn't escape without a bite or two. The entire city quieted significantly at that moment. Everyone present had some level of skill, so they could clearly hear the words spoken in the sky above. When they heard what Lin Dong said, many couldn't help but gasp. They had long heard of his fearless reputation, but they hadn't expected him to be so defiant, even in the face of a super dynasty. Quite the stubborn one, Tianjun, standing before the Golden Hall, sneered as he looked up at the sky. His eyes were filled with schadenfreude. He knew that with Lin Dong and his companion's attitude, they had just blocked the only retreat available to them. "You'll regret this," Zhu Tianhua said. Surprisingly, he didn't lash out in anger at Lin Dong's response, but instead spoke with a calm tone. Behind him, Mu Huang's usually stone-cold face twisted into a slight smirk, one filled with mockery. His massive hands slowly clenched, and a storm-like surge of energy suddenly erupted from his body. Boom! Little Yin stepped forward, his enormous figure casting a shadow over Mu Huang. A flash of murderous intent flickered in Little Yan's eyes, and with a swing of his iron rod, he aimed straight for Mu Huang's head. Mu Huang's eyes turned icy as he took a step forward. His body glowed with a dazzling golden light, and an arm seemingly forged from pure gold shot out, meeting the iron rod head-on with a punch. Clang! The sharp sound of metal clashing echoed through the air, followed by an explosive wave of energy visible to the naked eye. The surrounding air was compressed so intensely that it whistled sharply under the pressure. As the fierce windstorm swept through, both Little Yin and Mu Huang's bodies trembled violently, and they each took half a step back simultaneously. This scene, witnessed by many in the ancient hall, caused their expressions to change. Most people here had heard of Mu Huang's strength. It was said he was capable of attempting his fourth Nirvana tribulation and was already listed on the Nirvana ranking as a fearsome warrior. They had assumed the fight would be one-sided in Mu Huang's favor. Yet, to their surprise, the two appeared evenly matched. Could it be that Lin Dong's companions had grown so powerful without anyone realizing it? Boom! Little Yin barely finished taking that half step back when he stabilized himself, the blood-red light in his eyes intensifying. A bloodthirsty grin slowly crept across his face. In the next instant, Little Yin stomped the air and transformed into a streak of blood-red light. His iron rod transformed into a flurry of violent shadows, raining down upon Mu Huang like a torrential storm. Seeing Little Yin bypass him to directly attack Mu Huang, Zhu Tianhua's eyes instantly turned cold. He gripped his hand, and a crimson spear appeared. With a sharp motion, the spear traced a deadly arc through the air, darting toward Little Yan's throat like lightning. Clang! Before Zhu Tianhua's attack could reach Little Yin, however, a cold glint flashed through the air, knocking the tip of his spear aside. Lin Dong's figure appeared in front of him. "Let me be your opponent. You don't need to interfere with their fight," Lin Dong said with a smile, holding the sky crocodile bone spear in his hand, as he calmly looked at Zhu Tianhua, whose gaze was steadily darkening. "Do you think you're qualified?" Zhu Tianhua asked, his expression growing increasingly sinister. Lin Dong smiled and said nothing more, simply raising the bone spear and pointing it toward Zhu Tianhua, the meaning behind the gesture unmistakable. "You're on the Nirvana ranking, right? I wonder, if I defeat you, will that make me eligible to be on the list?" Lin Dong asked, his tone casual but filled with provocation. Zhu Tianhua's face twisted with rage, and his playful demeanor vanished entirely. A terrifying wave of power slowly spread from his body, and his voice, cold and ominous, echoed across the sky above the ancient hall. "You're thinking too much. The dead have no qualifications?" Hearing Zhu Tianhua's murderous words, everyone's hearts trembled. They knew there was no turning back now. Today's conflict would not end peacefully. In an instant, a tremendous surge of primordial energy erupted from Zhu Tianhua's body, far surpassing that of an ordinary threefold Nirvana expert. Feeling the intensity of the energy, Lin Dong's gaze sharpened slightly. Zhu Tianhua's arrogant words weren't without merit. His strength far exceeded that of the typical black horses who had risen to power through luck and treasure alone. However, Lin Dong's strength wasn't something that came from relying on so-called treasures to achieve instant success. From the time he entered the ancient battleground at the peak creation stage, he had risen step by step, enduring countless bloody battles and intense training. That's what brought him to where he stood today. If Zhu Tianhua thought Lin Dong was just another one of those half-baked upstarts who had fallen at his hands, he was in for a big surprise. "Leave him to me. Little Mink, you don't need to step in," Lin Dong said, glancing over his shoulder at Little Mink. Hearing this, Little Mink frowned slightly but understood Lin Dong's concern that if he acted recklessly, he might expose his true identity. He reluctantly waved his hand and lazily replied, "Fine. I don't have much interest in fighting someone like this anyway." Upon hearing these words, Lin Dong couldn't help but shake his head in exasperation. Sure enough, when he turned back to look, he saw that Zhu Tianhua's face had darkened considerably, clearly angered by Little Mink's dismissive comment. "I hope you'll still be this stubborn in a little while." Zhu Tianhua sneered. The vast primordial energy around him rippled outward like tidal waves as he slowly raised his crimson spear. A cold gleam locked onto Lin Dong, and he bared his teeth in a chilling grin. Lin Dong raised an eyebrow slightly, about to respond, but before he could, Zhu Tianhua's eyes flashed with cold intent, and his figure suddenly shot forward. The crimson spear in his hand danced through the air, forming several fiery spear blossoms, each aimed at Lin Dong's vital points with deadly precision. Clang! Clang! The spear blossoms surged forward, but as they reached within a few feet of Lin Dong, the sharp gleam of his bone spear swept out, intercepting the fiery strikes head-on. Sparks flew, and a violent wave of energy erupted at the point of impact, sending shockwaves through the air. After blocking Zhu Tianhua's assault, Lin Dong didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, his arm vibrating as he swung his bone spear in a cunning arc, aiming directly at Zhu Tianhua's heart. Humph! Seeing Lin Dong's ruthless counterattack, Zhu Tianhua let out a cold snort. His spear shaft bent at an unnatural angle, deflecting Lin Dong's strike with a powerful rebound. Whoosh! Whoosh! Lin Dong's eyes flashed as his attack was blocked. Without hesitation, he launched another flurry of rapid, ferocious spear strikes. Both he and Zhu Tianhua were masters of the spear, and as they clashed, their weapons filled the sky with swirling spear shadows. Sparks flew everywhere, dazzling onlookers with the sheer speed and intensity of their battle. Inside the ancient hall, countless gazes were fixed on the two combatants. As their fight raged on, some of the more astute observers began to grow solemn. Despite Zhu Tianhua's ferocious onslaught, Lin Dong showed no signs of faltering. With his bone spear in hand, he deflected every one of Zhu Tianhua's attacks with precision. By now, everyone had fully realized that Lin Dong's strength had far surpassed what it had been when he first entered the ancient treasure. He had grown immensely since then. Boom! Meanwhile, in contrast to Lin Dong's battle, the clash between Little Yin and Mu Huang was a completely different spectacle. Both were brawlers, skilled at direct, brutal combat. Their fists and iron rod collided repeatedly, producing thunderous sounds that left a powerful visual impact. Mu Huang's body was enveloped in radiant golden light, clearly pushing his nirvana golden body to its limit. In comparison, Little Yin was clad in a blood-red battle armor, exuding an intense killing aura that seemed to be gradually overpowering Mu Huang. Little Yin, being a beast, had undergone numerous trials and tribulations. Though Mu Huang was highly accomplished in physical cultivation, it was clear he couldn't quite compare to Little Yin in this aspect. The black iron rod whistled through the air, creating a sharp sonic boom. It seized upon a small opening in Mu Huang's defenses and struck heavily upon his shoulder. Bang! Bang! A powerful surge of energy exploded from Mu Huang's shoulder, and his hulking figure was forced to take several steps back. The golden light around his shoulder dimmed slightly. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd watching the battle below. They hadn't expected this previously unknown Little Yin to actually gain the upper hand in his battle against Mu Huang, the mountain general. Even Tianjun, standing in front of the Golden Hall, couldn't help but show a change in expression at this sight. It seemed that the legacies Lin Dong and his companions had obtained from the Grand Profound sect had greatly benefited them. Otherwise, there was no way they could have come this far. Thinking of this, Tian Jun's eyes flashed with bitterness and resentment. It should have been him who gained the power boost from the legacy. Those two bastards, do they really think the 4 generals of the Great Qin dynasty are so easily defeated? It's still too early for them to be celebrating, Tianjin muttered darkly, a sinister smile creeping across his face. Whoosh! Lin Dong's bone spear sliced through the air, narrowly missing Zhu Tianhua's ear and slicing off a few strands of hair. In response, Lin Dong's left palm shot out, colliding with Zhu Tianhua's violent counterattack. A deep, muffled sound echoed out as the two were both forced back by the impact. You've got some skill. You're definitely not like those other upstart black horses I've encountered, Zhu Tianhua said coldly, his gaze fixed on Lin Dong as he ran a hand over the side of his head. Lin Dong stood tall, his body straight as a spear. The bone spear in his hand pointed toward the ground, and the surging primordial energy around him was no weaker than Zhu Tianhua's. Your companion doesn't seem to be a match for my brother, Lin Dong remarked with a slight smile as he glanced over at the distant battle. It's too early to say such things, Zhu Tianhua sneered. His expression grew more serious as his hands began to form a strange series of seals. As his hand movements became faster, the primordial energy swirling around him suddenly began to boil. We are different from people like you who rise up relying on legacies. The foundation of a super dynasty is beyond the imagination of someone from a low-tier dynasty like yours. Boom. As Zhu Tianhua began to act, a dull sound suddenly echoed from the distant battle zone. Mu Huang's body appeared to be swelling, and waves of powerful and violent primordial energy surged out madly from him. Lin Dong observed the sudden surge of energy around both combatants and narrowed his eyes slightly. He muttered softly, "So, they're finally using their true strength?" Zhu Tianhua's primordial energy shifted with the changes in his hand seals, suddenly turning a deep crimson. From a distance, it looked like a sea of fire engulfing the sky. As the fire sea spread, Zhu Tianhua's body also turned red, and his flaming red hair became an even darker shade of crimson, eventually resembling flowing blood. The entire city had its attention fixed on the sky. The onlookers could feel the terrifying power that Zhu Tianhua and Mu Huang were about to unleash. It was clear that they did not plan to prolong this battle any further. Lin Dong, forcing the two of us to this point is something you can be proud of. Zhu Tianhua's thunderous voice rolled out from the sea of fire, with scorching sound waves reverberating within it. Within the sea of fire, Zhu Tianhua's figure flickered in and out of view. In the next moment, the sea of fire churned, and the void above it cracked as a colossal figure wrapped entirely in flames slowly condensed into existence. Boom! As the fiery figure appeared, the temperature in the world seemed to skyrocket in an instant, and the surrounding primordial energy began to boil. Roar! Simultaneously, Mu Huang's body expanded to over 10 meters tall, his skin rapidly turning a deep, earthy yellow. Cracks began to form across his skin, and a heavy, mountain-like pressure radiated from his body. From a distance, Mu Huang now resembled a towering mountain. Gasp! A chorus of gasps rippled through the city as countless eyes widened in awe and fear. This level of martial art was exactly what many had long dreamed of mastering, as expected from a super dynasty. Interesting. The sea of fire reflected in Lin Dong's pupils as flames flickered. He slowly extended his arm, his long hand emerging from his sleeve. Deep within his eyes, tiny sparks of fire began to dance. Lin Dong, let me show you the spirit martial arts of the Great Qin dynasty. If you die from this, it won't be unjust. A low growl swept out from the sea of fire, and in the next instant, the flames surged wildly as the fiery figure solidified. Flame demon force, burn the world. Mountain body, shift the peaks. A terrifying force spread from the sky like a hurricane. In the blink of an eye, the sea of fire dissipated, revealing a colossal figure over a dozen meters tall, entirely wrapped in flames, standing amidst the battlefield, its presence drawing the attention of all. Boom! Not far away, Mu Huang's swollen body finally stopped expanding. Strange patterns crawled across his mountain-like yellow skin. He slowly lowered his head, glaring coldly at Little Yin, his eyes brimming with murderous intent. The fight ends now. The cold voices of both the fiery giant and the mountainous Mu Huang echoed simultaneously. With a single step, they unleashed an overwhelming gust of wind, bringing a destructive force that hurtled toward Lin Dong and Little Yin like lightning. The might of spirit martial arts was terrifying beyond words. A storm of power raged across the sky as two enormous fists, filled with boundless power, turned into shadows and enveloped Lin Dong and Little Yin. As the punches tore through the air, explosions sounded in the sky, and even some of the tall buildings in the city below began to crack under the pressure, their structures starting to sway and collapse. It was just a single punch, yet its ferocity was already this overwhelming. Spirit martial arts, huh? Lin Dong gazed at the rapidly enlarging fiery fist in his eyes. Even though the punch was scorching hot, he could sense a cold killing intent hidden within it. It was clear that Zhu Tianhua had no intention of holding back. Impressive, but it's not enough. A brilliant smile spread across Lin Dong's face, and in that instant, azure light burst out from within his body. The burst of azure light seemed almost too slow, as before Lin Dong could launch a counterattack, the fiery giant's massive fist came crashing down. Under countless watchful eyes, it struck the freshly spread azure light with a thunderous blow. Boom, boom. Two dull, ear-piercing sounds echoed through the sky, the first from the fiery fist smashing into the azure glow, and the second from Little Yin, who was struck directly by a punch from Mu Huang, now transformed into a giant mountain. Seeing this scene, some regretful murmurs arose from the crowd below. Such a ferocious attack would likely leave even a threefold Nirvana expert gravely injured if hit head-on. However, the regretful sounds didn't last long before they abruptly stopped. To everyone's shock, no battered figures were thrown out of the azure or blood-red light. It was as if the terrifying power contained in those giant fists had simply sunk into the abyss without a trace. This eerie scene was obvious to anyone watching. The two massive fists had plowed into the swirling azure and blood-red light, but their impact seemed almost non-existent. In the sky, the flames in the heart of the fiery giant flickered slightly, revealing Zhu Tianhua's shadowy figure within. His face darkened as he stared at the glowing azure light. The feedback from his fist told him that his devastating blow had failed to produce the expected result. In the silence that enveloped the sky, the azure glow finally began to recede. In a matter of moments, a figure, shrouded in a faint azure aura, emerged from the light, once again in full view of everyone. At that moment, the figure extended his right hand, pressing it against the disproportionately large fist. Yet, that seemingly slender hand completely halted the advance of the massive fist. Zhu Tianhua's strike, powerful enough to severely injure a typical threefold Nirvana expert, had been blocked by Lin Dong with just one hand. Gasps filled the air as countless people looked at Lin Dong as if he were some kind of monster. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the crowd burst into another uproar. Eyes shifted, and they saw that the blood-red glow had dispersed as well. There, Little Yin, his body still enveloped in blood-red light, had extended his arms and caught hold of one of Mu Huang's giant arms. He looked as though he was preparing to throw the mountain giant. Courting death, Mu Huang immediately sensed Little Yan's intentions and erupted in fury. With a thunderous roar, he launched another punch. The immense force behind it was so great that even the surrounding space seemed to warp under the pressure. Roar! Little Yan's body surged with blood-red light as a low tiger's roar escaped his mouth. Undeterred, he stepped forward, and with his own fist, enveloped in blood-red energy, he clashed head-on with Mu Huang's massive punch. Boom! A deep, bone-rattling sound reverberated as the two fists collided. A nearly solid ripple of energy spread violently from the point of impact, instantly tearing the air apart. The dense blood-red light, filled with overwhelming killing intent, burst from Little Yan's body. It seemed to take the form of a giant blood-colored tiger, coiling around him. Get lost. With a ferocious gleam in his eyes, Little Yan's arms bulged with veins writhing like small snakes. A raw, primal force, like that of an ancient brute capable of moving mountains, exploded from his body. Countless gazes turned to sheer disbelief as they watched. Mu Huang, transformed into a mountain giant, was lifted off the ground by Little Yin and swung around like a massive windmill before being hurled violently to the ground. Boom! The giant figure crashed into the city below, sending people scrambling as buildings crumbled in the wake of the impact. The entire city descended into chaos, triggered by Little Yan's raw display of strength. Lin Dong's eyes flashed with surprise as he observed the scene. It seemed that Little Yan's 4 months of training had significantly boosted his power to a frightening level. Heh, it seems your companion really isn't a match for my brother, Lin Dong said with a smile, looking up at the fiery giant enveloped in flames. You talk too much. I'll finish you quickly, then deal with your brother, said Zhu Tianhua coldly, his shadowy figure flickering within the fiery giant. The next moment, the enormous body shot forward, bringing with it a storm of fiery energy, like a wave of flames crashing down upon Lin Dong. With a tap of his foot, Lin Dong swiftly retreated, his bone spear flashing through the air as countless sharp spear shadows shot out, crashing into the massive figure. Clang! Clang! The spear shadows struck the giant figure, producing sharp metallic sounds and a shower of sparks, but they failed to have any meaningful effect. Imph! This is the flame demon body. You can't break through it. The same goes for Mu Huang. He has the mountain body. You think your brother can hurt him? You can't even breach our defenses, and you still dare to fight us? You're dreaming. Zhu Tianhua sneered, his tone filled with mockery. Lin Dong narrowed his eyes slightly and cast a quick glance toward the city below. Sure enough, the giant figure that Little Yin had thrown was already getting back on its feet. Grabbing a massive boulder, it charged menacingly at Little Yin once more. So, you're relying on a turtle shell for protection? A cold smile flickered in Lin Dong's eyes. He had to admit, Zhu Tianhua and Mu Huang were indeed difficult to deal with, but he was no longer the same person he had been 4 months ago. If you're so proud of your turtle shell, then I'll just break it. Lin Dong sneered. With just you? Zhu Tianhua's lips curled into a mocking sneer, challenging him. Yes, with just me. Lin Dong smiled, and without retreating, he charged straight toward Zhu Tianhua. How reckless! Zhu Tianhua's eyes turned icy cold as fiery energy surged to his massive hand, which then came crashing down toward Lin Dong. Flame Demon Palm. The massive flaming palm descended with a roar, flames swirling in its center, accompanied by a piercing, chilling scream. It was as though the palm held vengeful spirits within its grasp. Roar! The fiery palm loomed overhead, casting a shadow that blocked all of Lin Dong's escape routes. Yet, Lin Dong showed no trace of fear. His hands shifted into a seal, and the azure light swirling around his body began to shift and pulse. Gradually, it formed a strange membrane on his skin, and as it took shape, the faint sound of a dragon's roar echoed. Whoosh! Covered in the azure dragon skin, Lin Dong shot forward like a meteor, and with one hand, he met the flaming giant palm head-on. Explode! Seeing Lin Dong's reckless move, Zhu Tianhua's eyes filled with even colder malice. He let out a harsh command, and the fiery palm suddenly intensified before it exploded with a loud bang. Whoosh! The violent flames, powerful enough to severely wound a threefold Nirvana expert, surged outward like a grand fiery spectacle. As Zhu Tianhua observed this, a low, mocking chuckle escaped his lips. But before his laugh could fully form, his face froze. The flames had barely finished raging when a bolt of azure light burst out of the firestorm like an unstoppable force, appearing directly at the giant's chest, right where his true body resided. Lin Dong, you can't possibly break through my flame demon body defense, Zhu Tianhua shouted, slightly shaken by Lin Dong's sudden appearance, but quickly regaining his composure. Don't be so sure. Lin Dong raised his head and grinned at Zhu Tianhua, his eyes flashing with a sharp, chilling intensity. Shoo-shoo. Azure light wriggled madly around Lin Dong's body, and then something strange happened. Tiny, Azure-colored scales began to appear on his right palm. The scales weren't dense, but the faint glow they emitted made Zhu Tianhua's heart surge with a strong sense of unease and danger. Azure Dragon's sky-tearing hand. By this time, any attempt at a counteraction would be futile. Lin Dong's expression turned as cold as ice, and his hand, covered in azure scales, shot out like a flash of lightning, tearing through the void. It struck the fiery giant's chest with deadly precision, and under Zhu Tianhua's horrified gaze, it pierced through the defense he had been so proud of.